I was later to find out that telling the truth about this is the hardest thing that you can imagine. Anyway, I went back home, I wrote like my magazine piece. Then I wrote another one for an American magazine called Men's Journal, which I'd done a lot of assignments for in the past. And like all media, we were looking for a hero. But like what the media does is we look for heroes in our own image. So they wanted a climber who could like redeem the other climbers, because not many people had done anything when they saw this. But we found one guy, an American climber, who had sent an email out about the murder and alerted the world, even though he then tried to retract it when he realized that this could affect his climbing career. So I wrote the piece, but I wasn't happy. That wasn't the end of the story. The people in the tent and the people coming the other way and meeting the Dalai Lama had really caused me to, question what I was doing as a journalist, because the story I was telling was not the complete story. I wanted to know who that black dot was in the snow. And why was nobody interested in her story? Why weren't all the women's kind of magazines interested? And they're not. They weren't. So I decided that the only way really was to write a book about it. And a lot of my editors, magazine editors, said, if you write a book about this, it will be the end of your career. China's coming up in the world, you need access to China, you need to be able to cover stories there. And this is an old issue, this is past its sell-by date. Like we had the Beastie Boys concerts in Central Park, like Richard Gere and all that stuff. It's gone. Focus on other stuff. But I decided that I wanted to do it. I wanted to press ahead. And this is the girl who was shot. This is what, human rights looks like. When we use the term human rights, it can be sort of lost in a fog. It's like genocide in Africa and famine. What does it look like? Well, it looks like this. This is 17-year-old Kelsang Namso. She lived in a village, and she had a best friend, BFF. This is Dolma. This is her best friend. And Kelsang she was a rebel. She never did what her parents said. She went to school and caused a fuss, and didn't want to learn the sort of Chinese dogma. And the one thing that you can do in Tibet, if you want to be a rebel, if you want to be a real rebel, not just because dye your hair and go crazy. If you want to be a real rebel, like you become a nun, you become a Buddhist nun. And then you're really going to get a lot of attention. So that's what she did. She became a Buddhist nun. And when she became a nun, she realized that all the monasteries are regulated, that you can only learn a Chinese version of Buddhism. And that the Chinese even have rules who can reincarnate, that people have to ask the Chinese government in order to reincarnate. It was ridiculous. So she, with her friend, Dolma, decided that they wanted to escape. They wanted an education. They wanted to risk their lives. They wanted to cross those mountains, which is a 3-week journey, -40, crevasses, soldiers. And if you get caught before you even leave the country escaping, then you get into like serious trouble. You go to prison, you get tortured. So this is their home. And they hired a sort of underground guide. This is a guy that I spoke to so this is risked his life leading refugees over the mountains. He got caught once. He did a 20-year prison term. He was tortured. I mean, I saw the welts on his body where they put the bars of an electric fire on his arm, things like that. So these two girls decided to make this trip, and I decided that I needed to understand a little bit of what that was like. I mean, I'd been up on the border, I had an understanding, but to really understand the sort of Orwellian nature of a country under martial law where all journalists are banned, you know, there's no freedom of speech, I needed to sort of spend some time there. So I hired a guide, and I went like with a group, and the only way I could go as a journalist was to join a trip that was not overtly journalistic. I mean, I couldn't go as a tourist because I wanted to get into these very remote areas. So I found this very eccentric German guy who was leading a trip to find caterpillar fungus, which in the high mountains of Tibet is worth huge amounts of money. The Chinese use this as an aphrodisiac in Beijing and Shanghai. So the Tibetans are making all this money getting this stuff. So, like, because we went up, flew into Lhasa, and the first thing about the place is that there's this creeping fear everywhere. There's this sense that you're being watched all the time. And I was told by my guides that the people running the hotel were military. And you could tell the guys had biggest buzz cuts, and the guy who picked up your bags had a military buzz cut, was beefed up. We went to look around the monasteries, and you could see that, so some of the monks didn't look Tibetan, they looked Chinese. And they would talk with you in perfect English, which, how would the Tibetan be able to learn this, you know? So it got sort of more and more interesting, and I was there, we drove up, we got through some checkpoints, we went to this town called Jushan, so where the girls are from, and there was a knock on my hotel room door at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the guy said, the Chinese police have heard we're here, we're in a restricted area, we're in big trouble. Our passports got confiscated, and we were told we were going to have a military escort out of the area back to a military garrison where we were going to be questioned on what we were doing there. So you can imagine the hair on the back of my neck stands up, you know, this is not what I wanted, you know, this is going to get really ugly now. I had a friend in Beijing, and you know, I'd said if I was ever going to get into any type of hot water, I would call him first, and then we would wait 48 hours, and if he hadn't heard anything, he would call to the British Embassy and my wife. So I called him, we were driving down in the morning, you know, we'd seen the police. They decided in the end that they weren't going to give us an escort, that they were going to time the journey from where we left to where we were going. It's just one road, there's no turn off. So we drove all the way down, I'm calling him on the cell phone, trying to get like reception. And I'm beginning to get a very small understanding of what it's like to be a refugee. How terrifying it really is. But not a full understanding, because I know that if I get caught, yes, I mean, I could be arrested, I could probably go to jail, but I have a strong government on my side. The refugees have nothing. So it gave me an understanding of what they went through. So, well, we made it down, we got to the garrison, we were placed under house arrest in a hotel, and the guide managed to pay them off. So we managed to get away. Like, we got out, I carried on my journey, and I went, you know, I carried on doing what I was doing. Like, this is me, like, with a family, collecting caterpillar fungus, which which is what they were doing. This is a picture of the Potala Palace, where the Dalai Lamas, you know, stretching back, I think, to the 12th century, ruled the country, and like that's the Chinese flag, just in case you're in any doubt whose country it is. That's an idea again of the scale of the place. And then this is one of the views that the two girls who were escaping would have seen. This is what they had to cross to get to where they were going. So this is probably one of the last views they would have seen up in the mountains. Now the border's not far, but it's still 10 days walk because of the landscape. So they got through all this, and they were starving, hungry, and then they got to 15 minutes away from crossing the border into Nepal when the Chinese soldiers came out and opened fire. And that's Kelsang Namso, lying there in the snow, willing to die because she wanted knowledge. She wanted an education. So, we had the Beijing Olympics in 2008. People cheered China. They said that it lifted more people out of poverty than ever before. But the repression and the censorship is beginning to spread now. It's not just in China. It's in Nepal. This is a picture taken in Nepal, where anyone who's a Buddhist nun in Nepal, it's a completely different country next door, is arrested because the Nepalese are paid by the Chinese. In America, corporations who do business in China can't talk about human rights. If they do, jeopardize their business. When Nelson Mandela died recently, the Dalai Lama wasn't granted a visa to go to South Africa because of the Chinese business interests in that country. So now you're understanding that the Chinese government's censorship is spreading from Tibet, what they've made so effective in that country, by destroying education, by destroying like the free press, by destroying the things that, you know, we hold dear in this country that we're lucky to have. They're using all that to gain in power. So, is this the climbers on the mountainside? I mean, is this us? So, this is Dolma Palki now. She's in India, and when we started this book, and I started to write my book, and I said, look, like, you realize, if you tell this story, you'll never be able to go home again. All your friends will be able to go back into Tibet, but you won't be able to go back because the authorities will know about you. She said, I don't care. I want the story told. I want people to understand what is happening in my country. I want people to have the education that I was never given. And I want my friend Kelsang Namso's memory to be preserved. I want her to have a good rebirth and she reincarnates, and I want to free the bad karma. And by telling this story, it will liberate me and it will liberate everybody else. So through her sacrifice, there's a book which is banned in China. You can't buy this in China. If you got caught with it in China, you would be arrested. I'm banned in China. I can't go back there. So, good riddance, you know. So, I just want to leave you with one last quote, which I love George Orwell. He was my inspiration as a writer, and I think as teachers, this is so relevant to what you guys do. If you control the past and history, you control the future. And he who controls the present controls the past. That's the one thing China doesn't want people to do. And I think it's incumbent upon you as you teach children to free their minds and to be grateful that we live in a free country. Thank you very much.